Welcome to SAM Conversation, a program of South Asia Monitor. We are going to discuss today two epic battles of the Indian Army. One during the India-Pakistan War of 1965, the Battle of Phillora, and the other in 1967, when there were some skirmishes in Sikkim at Nathu and Chola. 11th September 1965 was the day when a regiment called 4 Horse, also known as Hodson's Horse, captured Phillora. And 11th September 67 was the day when the skirmishes at Nathu were given a, the Chinese were given a very befitting answer. And they've been instituted as Phillora Day and Nathu Day, the same day. One common factor in them is that the regiment 4 Horse in 1965 was commanded by then Lieutenant Colonel MMS Bakshi, who was awarded a Mahavir Chakra. And it is the same MMS Bakshi who 2 years later as a brigadier was commanding the Nathu Brigade. It is my pleasure to welcome Brigadier Jasbir Singh of Hodson's Horse, who was, I'll say, I think to say a participant would not be fair because he was literally all over, as I will explain. And Colonel N.C. Gupta, who during the skirmishes in 1967 was a young lieutenant from the signals, and he was as the term for the signalers goes, the sparrow to the commander of the Nathu Brigade. The sparrow of the Nathu Brigade. I'm Col Anil Bhat, and I'll very, very briefly bring out some points about both the 1965 Battle of Phillora and the events that led to the Chinese being given a very befitting response at Nathu in 1967. This regiment, 4 Horse, also known as Hodson's Horse, there is an ironic relationship it has with the Pakistan of those days, which was headed by self-promoted, self-styled Field Marshal Ayub Khan. Ayub Khan is one who always boasted that one Pakistani is equal to 10 or more Hindu soldiers, Indian soldiers. His son had served in Hodson's Horse. His son retired as Risalda Major Mir Dad Khan. And it is this regiment which scored the maximum number of hits of destroying enemy tanks, that is tanks of his army. It is his son's regiment which really was the hardest hitter towards his army's armor. As the events built up in 1965, 4 Horse was to give fire support, but owing to various events in the battle, and the weather also. It turned out to be, its task was changed at very short notice. And it is typical of its history, of very often in its history, they reacted very quickly and very effectively. Without saying much, I will leave it to Brigadier Jasbir Singh. Brigadier Jasbir Singh, during that war, was a reconnaissance troop leader in an open jeep with just a machine gun mounted in front of him and radio sets. He, as a reconnaissance troop leader, was the eyes and ears of the regiment. And as such, he was all over. He was all over the battle area. In some past meetings, we've discussed what all he did there. And I recall those days, the adjutant, Captain J.P. Singh, later Brigadier J.P. Singh, God bless his soul, he's not with us. He died a couple of years ago. He recalled one incident when Brigadier Jasbir, then young Captain Jasbir, had, come from a very, very hectic reconnaissance trip, and all that he did was said, JP, let's have a cup of tea. That is, I think, typical of, and he's also known during both these wars to have fought them more with his head outside the tank, or sometimes his whole body outside the tank. He was seen when the shells are flying and the bullets are flying, he was often outside the tank for a better view. Any tank commander, for him, the view is very important. So that's what he used to do for a better view. By God's grace, he's with us today. Colonel N.C. Gupta, in 1967, around September, it needs to be mentioned that after the 1962 war, the Chinese People's Liberation Army was quite trigger happy along the line of actual control. Trigger happy on very, very, at the drop of a hat, they'll say, you're in my territory, get out. These are soldiers who are, in every battalion, they have a political commissar of the Chinese Communist Party who make sure that the ideology is kept alive, maintained. At a stage sometime in August or so of 1967, it was decided that to avoid this everyday, differences and, resulting in firing at each other, or more often the Chinese firing at Indians without Indians reacting too much, that a barbed wire should be laid. And that is when the Chinese got so riled up that they started firing at the Indian Army with heavy mortars, artillery. I was describing the events which led up to things hotting up between the People's Liberation Army and the Indian Army. And mainly because the PLA started using artillery against the Indian Army and causing a lot of casualties. Brigadier MMS Bakshi, the brigade commander, felt that he must respond in kind, but the use of artillery required the approval of the government. So his request was duly sent up, and it went up to the government. It went up to, in fact, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who was holding the defense portfolio also, and she didn't she immediately gave approval. And then I think Brigadier Colonel Gupta is best placed to inform us what all happened, because he was not just the signals officer of the brigade. He's one who wrote quite a bit about what happened. I will first hand you all over to Brigadier Jasbir Singh to familiarize us with what happened at Phillora. Brigadier Jasbir, sir.
Thank you, Anil. All that I would say with regards to the Battle of Phillora, and I say before I start off with the Battle of Phillora, I think it was a privilege to be a part of both wars, 6-5 war as a captain and then as a strong commander. I was the recce troop leader, as Anil has already mentioned, and therefore I did have an opportunity to move all around to see what all was going on, because one had to do all the coordinations between the different sections of the regiment. As far as the Battle of Phillora is concerned, yes, on the 11th of September, we started our advance from our area. We had moved to this area of Rotki Kala at night, and in the early morning, at first light, we started off the advance. Soon afterwards, the advance was started with 2 squadrons up, B and C squadron, and A squadron was in reserve. And soon after dawn, we had a first airstrike. Pakistan Air was very active throughout the war at 65. And we also had our second casualty. We had already lost OCA squadron Major Dillon as a result of heavy shelling by the Pakistan Army. And now, as a result of an airstrike, the squadron commander, Major Sergeant Uts, got injured as a result of strafing by the Pakistan Army, and he lost an eye and had to be evacuated. The responsibility for C squadron then fell on a young lieutenant, Sunny Nera, who was a troop leader. We went on, and in between, midway to Phillora, we came to a village, Rotki Kala, which had to be cleared. C squadron was given the task, along with a battalion of the Lloyd Infantry Brigade, to clear Rotki Kala, while the regiment carried on further. By roughly midday, or you can say about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, we had reached Phillora, and had, after securing Rotki Kala, kept on the advance, and we reached Phillora and cut off Phillora from the north and the west. Hotsauce was to the south, with Pune Horse further north. The task given to Pune Horse was that they were to establish stops approximately 10 kilometers north and west of Phillora, so that any armor or any reinforcements coming in were not permitted. North of Phillora was Sialkot, and there was a road which connected Phillora to Sialkot. And hence, Sialkot being a major armor base, it was appreciated that there may be any time reinforcements coming in from that direction, and hence the tasks were given to Pune Horse. Hotsauce being on the left had already cut off Phillora, with all 3 squads there. We carried out complete annihilation of all the positions which were surrounding Phillora. All the enemy positions, their bunkers were shot up by tank fire, and it was all raised down to the extreme. This was done primarily so that subsequently, when the Lloyd Infantry Brigade comes in to mop up the area. There was minimum opposition available. We had in the meantime C-SCON with Sarinera, B-SCON and A-SCON, all three lined up to the north of Phillora to give direct fire support and also at the same time to take on any enemy tanks which were trying to pull out from Phillora or north of it and head backwards. There were a number of casualties from the enemy side. We fortunately lost Major J. Sargeants, and we had 2 or 3 tank casualties, but otherwise we had maintained our intact and had shot up, eliminated most of the opposition in Phillora. Thereafter, in the evening, around about 4 o'clock, the infantry went in for the Lord Infantry Brigade after we had done most of the damage, and they mopped up, they cleared up, and then to secure Phillora. That, in short, is, in a nutshell, is what happened at Phillora. Any queries, any other angles, I'll try and cover. That's all that is which I have for Phillora.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. If I may add, I think Brig Jasbir is quite typical of him. He's quite modest. Whereas someone who's not only of the regiment, but one who's delved into its history and written extensively about it. It is after this battle that the Pakistan army became very shy of facing this same regiment, and particularly also Centurion tanks. We were able to capture a number of Pakistani tanks, including Patton, the then very new Pattons gifted to them by the US, intact, with very little mileage on them, which was an indication that they may not have trained much on them. It was only feeling heady about getting a lot of arms and equipment from the United States. That is what had led the Pakistan into and thinking that Indian Army had a bad time during 1962. Well, Indian Army had a bad time during 1962, not because it was wanting in any way in valor. That's because of the, I'm not a political person, but as a simple analyst, I say it's because of the flaws in political leadership. Anyway, the fact remains that the 4-horse, Hodson's horse, scored about 80 odd hits, destroyed about 80 enemy tanks and 17 recoilless guns, which is probably the highest score of any regiment so far.
Anil, if I can add over here,
yes,
what you're saying is very right. I remember going into a Pakistani tank, which we had destroyed. And when I looked at the mileage, it had only done 15 kilometers, which indicates that it is a fact that Americans had given them a lot of aid, military aid, and tanks, whereas we were still on our main tank was the Centurion, which was about 20 years old. But their brand new Patton tank with the latest equipment was there, and they had not hardly used it, they had preserved it. So that factor, what you say, is right. The equipment was the latest and most modern, where we were still with post-Second World War vintage tanks fighting them. In fact, some of the regiments had Sherman tanks.
Sure,
the Sherman tanks were of the Second World War vintage. But I think as an army, We gave them a prophetic reply, and we did have a lot of the casualties coming in, which we have seen and we saw subsequently.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Let's now move to the events at Nathula in 1967. Colonel Gupta, sir, I request you to enlighten us.
Okay, thanks a lot, Anil. It's a pleasure to be here today. And without wasting any time, I would like to recapitulate one or two points to bring you to the base at which point the actions started. Now, Nathula, those days, was one of the active scenes as far as Chinese is concerned. And the activity was of propaganda. Chinese in 67 set up speakers along the border at Nathula, and so did we. And propaganda tapes used to come from their headquarters. Maybe we used to get it from army headquarters, which we used to run during the daytime. And they contained propaganda as well as music. So our tapes were in Chinese. Their tapes used to be in Hindi. And of course, they had a political commissar who could speak Hindi, and we also had a person who could speak Chinese. Now, things started, quite peaceful. They had a couple of speakers, we had a couple of speakers, but then every day they would add 2 more speakers.
Oh.
And the things, we would protest, and, again, this continued, this drama continued for quite some time, till they reached about 24 speakers.
Oh.
And it was hell of a noise, and, it was quite this thing. The second thing which led to all these things was that place, the border was not demarcated. So, and, the troops are in very close contact. So if we went close to the border, they would say, no, this is part of, they would come down running and say, no, you are in Chinese territory. We would say, no, this is Indian territory. And this continued till it was decided by the GOC and the commander that we must demarcate the border with a fence. And it was decided that a barbed wire fence will be put along the border. The task was given to 2nd Grenadiers, which has just joined. It had replaced 18 Rajput. And the work started on this. And every time the engineer party would go there, they would come running and there would be hand-to-hand scuffle, like you have seen very recently in Doklam and other places.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So this was a repeat of what was going on over there. And this continued for over a month and a half. And sometimes, there would be bayonets, people would come and they would, so there used to be a little bit of injuries on and off, and hands fighting, things like this. Then it was, the commander said, we have had enough of this. And he decided that today we are going to lay the complete fence. We'll complete the task. So everything was geared up for that. And we were all there at the border at about 4 o'clock in the morning when the line laying started. Fence, not started, the work, certain amount had already been laid. And before I forget, that fence still exists. I had the fortune of going there last year, and I could see the fence still existing there as a memorable. Okay, so when this started, as usual, they started, but we had quite a few people, and the work was going on. Then I was with the commander, we were at a vantage point overlooking all this. And suddenly we found that they started thinning out. That means the number of troops at the border who were, stopping us from laying the fence had reduced. And then at some point of time, they just opened up with all the machine guns and all that they had on the border. And since we were very close to each other, there were initial heavy casualties on our side. Now, once this started, then, naturally all the battle procedures start, so I can't go into all those. But a few takes of that were, that after some time, they opened up with artillery fire. And since at Nathula Pass itself, they couldn't fire because the troops are very close to each other. So it was more in the rear areas. And in due course of time, of course, we also got permission to open up our artillery. And our initial deployment was such that we couldn't cause much damage to them. However, overnight, the GOC had moved 130 millimeter heavy medium guns to a place very close to the pass. And I think this is the highest battlefield on which these guns have ever fired at that time, you know. And I must say that the bulk of the casualties which the Chinese suffered, which were very high, was in their rear areas which they had never expected. And they suffered about 300 casualties. And that is why it is often said that they did get a bloody nose in this particular battle. As far as on our side, when it comes to the battle of the infantry, it was face-to-face contacts, so nothing much transpired between the two sides. We had two of their posts which were causing tremendous damage to us, machine gun posts, and our commando platoon tried to silence one of them. Unfortunately, they reached up to the post, they had almost silenced it, but they all got killed in the bargain, in which Captain Dagar was one of them, Major Harbhajan Singh, who later got MVC, Captain Dagar got VRC, and the brigade commander, the battalion commander, Colonel Rai Singh, got another MVC.
May I please just to highlight, Lieutenant Colonel Rai Singh got a Mahavir Chakra, and Major Harbhajan Singh got a Mahavir Chakra.
Yes.
And Captain Prithvi Singh Dagar got a Veer Chakra, sir.
Yeah, he got Veer Chakra.
But I'm told they were quite shaken by the actions of Captain Dagar, sir.
Yes, because they didn't expect that, you know, his platoon will attack that machine gun post. And they were quite shaken. In fact, I was at that place. In fact, the post at which I was.
Because you mentioned this, Major Bishan Singh. Then Major Bishan Singh, he also mentioned it. I thought I should just sort of remind you, sir.
Yeah, I went to a place, post called South Shoulder, which is closest to this machine.
Yes, sir.
Because we were out of communication with that post somehow. So the commander sent me to check up. When I reached there, I found almost, you know, the entire post had perished because of casualties. And so I was there for quite some time, almost alone, except for a few wounded people like Major Bishan Singh. And then reinforcements came, and, you know, so that's how things were. But they were shaken back. They didn't want to venture out of their trenches. They were quite badly shaken back.
And I'm also told that they actually wanted to see the cremation of, you know, Captain Dagar to believe that he's actually.
Yeah, the bodies were.
I don't know.
After 6 days, and he was cremated there as the others. We lost about 67 soldiers, and the Chinese had more casualties in the depth areas because of the artillery fire.
So you had 67 casualties in Nathula, and I think another 21 at Chola.
Yes.
Which makes it 88. Our casualties, fatal casualties being 88, and theirs being almost short of 400 almost.
Yeah, the estimates which were given to us by the intelligence and others, because, you know, you don't have, you know, head counts in such things, was around 300 plus in Nathula. depth area, and of course some in Chola.
Having studied and researched this, because the book which I am almost about to finish it takes off from 1967 Nathula skirmishes. It takes off from there, sir. And what emerges is that our actions at Nathula proved to be a game changer, because it is after this that the Chinese started pressing that we don't fire at each other, that we resolve all our differences only by discussion and dialogue.
I would say it must have had an effect. And the closest to that, the effect was seen that in 71, despite all their desires to help out Pakistan by opening another front, they refrained from it. 67 was not much behind in those days, just 4 years back.
Yes, sir.
Suffered very badly. And they had no clue on what they could suffer if they went in for another,
No, but it amounts to they're getting a taste of in just a few weeks.
Yes, yes.
In just a few
certainly.
weeks.
Yes.
We lost 88. God bless their souls, but they lost almost 400, and it was a great shock to them, sir.
Yes, and I think also a big shock that they couldn't believe that medium guns could reach that point and hit them so hard.
Yes, create so much damage.
Yes,
they lost a convoy. They lost a convoy of vehicles.
Yes.
And I think hundreds of bunkers, sir.
The entire Adam base, which is around 15 to 20 kilometers north
there you are, sir.
Was destroyed.
Sir. Because I think what happened then has the effect of it has lasted till last year. Because when they came last year, it wasn't with firearms. They came with these medieval barbaric weapons, but not firearms. And they killed 4 Assam riflemen at Tulungla in 1975. That was again not by bullets. It was by torture. It's just the fact. I mean, I'm just bringing out a fact that from that day onwards, the only firing that was done was on, I think, 7th September last year at Kailash range. They fired in the air.
Maybe, yeah.
And they were told to go back, and they went back. Anyway, thank you very much, sir. Brigadier Jasbir Singh, Gupta, thank you very much. I must mention that both were awarded the Sena Medal for Gallantry. In Brigadier Jasbir's case, he was a captain in 1965. He was a squadron commander in 1971 as a major. And again, did a lot of damage to the enemy that faced him. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Anil.
Thank you, Anil. Thank you very much, Anil.
Thank you.